Captain Ryan Hale was not a man easily shaken. Years of navigating treacherous space routes and dealing with emergencies had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He had seen storms that could tear ships apart, pirates who struck without warning, and mechanical failures that would make lesser pilots panic. But nothing in his years of experience could have prepared him for the signal he picked up that day. The message was faint, almost lost among the static but unmistakably desperate. A royal cruiser was trapped inside the Nebula of Theros. The transmission crackled with urgency and fear, repeating itself over and over. "Help! We are trapped. Oxygen failing." Ryan's hand hovered over the console as he listened, his mind racing. This was no ordinary distress call. This was a call from royalty, from people who had the weight of generations on their shoulders. And yet, there was a human touch in their plea, a raw fear that made it impossible to ignore. He adjusted his controls, checking his own ship's systems. His vessel, the Vigilant, was a sturdy craft, but it was built for speed and agility, not for surviving the deadly conditions of the Theros Nebula. The nebula had a reputation across every sector of space. It was a swirling living storm of gas and plasma that had swallowed entire fleets without leaving a trace. Navigational instruments often failed inside it, and the magnetic storms could fry electronics in an instant. Many pilots, even the bravest, avoided it entirely. Some said it was cursed. But Ryan was not one to turn away from a challenge, especially not when lives hung in the balance. He looked at the display showing the location of the royal cruiser. The signal was weak, bouncing unpredictably through the thick clouds of the nebula, but he could just make out the ship's outline. The cruiser was damaged, its life support systems failing, and its crew in panic. Most importantly, the signal confirmed that two royal sisters, Princess Lyra and Princess Selene, were on board. They were the heirs of the twin-star kingdom of Arendor, a realm steeped in tradition and ancient oaths. Their safety was crucial, not just politically but emotionally for the people who depended on them. Ryan felt a surge of determination. This was more than a mission. It was a chance to save not just lives but hope itself. He took a deep breath and ran through the plan in his mind. Entering the nebula meant risk at every turn. The plasma storms could rip his ship apart in seconds. Gravity distortions could throw him into infinite space. His navigation systems might fail entirely, leaving him blind. Even if he reached the cruiser, docking could be impossible. And yet Ryan's instincts told him that hesitation was more dangerous than action. Every second counted. Lives were slipping away as the royal crew struggled to keep their ship from collapsing. The decision was made in a heartbeat. "Hold on," he whispered to himself, a quiet promise more than a command. "I'm coming." He activated the ship's thrusters and guided the Vigilant toward the outer edge of the nebula. The transition was immediate and terrifying. Outside, the stars were calm, familiar, and reassuring. Inside the nebula, the world seemed to vanish. The lights of distant suns were swallowed by red and violet clouds glowing like fire and smoke. Lightning, made of pure plasma, arced unpredictably through the mist, illuminating shapes that were both beautiful and menacing. Ryan gritted his teeth, hands steady on the controls, as the ship shuddered under the invisible forces pressing against it. Every instrument he relied on flickered or went dark, and he was forced to trust his instincts honed through years of flying in space hazards and dangerous territories. Each movement required perfect precision. One wrong maneuver could tear the Vigilant apart or send him spiraling into the storm, never to be found. Meanwhile, aboard the royal cruiser, the situation was growing desperate. Princess Lyra, the older of the twins, moved among the crew with a calm that belied the fear in her heart. She was trained for diplomacy, strategy, and leadership, but no amount of preparation could fully prepare her for the life-or-death chaos of being trapped in a nebula. She tried repeatedly to send out emergency beacons, her fingers flying over damaged consoles, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, could hear them. Beside her, Selene, the younger sister, did what she could to comfort the frightened crew members. Her voice, soft but firm, offered reassurance even as alarms blared and oxygen levels dropped. They were young, yes, but their courage was extraordinary. They refused to give in to panic, even as the walls of their ship shook and twisted under the nebula's violent forces. Then, amidst the chaos, came the faint crackle of a human voice over the comms. "I see your beacon. I'm closing in." It was rough, strained, and barely audible, but it carried a tone of confidence that made the princess's hearts leap. The voice belonged to Ryan Hale. Somehow, impossibly, he had found them. A mixture of disbelief and relief washed over the crew. They had thought themselves alone, doomed to drift forever in the nebula's deadly embrace. But now, hope arrived in the form of a lone human pilot, daring to challenge the impossible. Lyra's hands tightened around the console. "Can it really be him?" she whispered. Celine nodded, her eyes wide but shining with trust. "It has to be. Only someone brave enough would come here." Back in the Vigilant, Ryan focused on closing the distance. Every movement was calculated, every second weighed. He anticipated sudden surges, lightning strikes, and unpredictable gravitational pulls. Sweat ran down his face, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of concentration required. His mind raced with strategies for docking with the damaged cruiser, for rescuing the crew, and for surviving the wrath of the Nebula itself. And yet, despite the danger, he felt an odd sense of calm. This was what he was trained for, what he had always been ready to do. He was alone against the storm, yes, but he was not afraid. Fear would only slow him down, and there was no time for hesitation. As Ryan drew closer, the Nebula seemed almost alive, reacting to his presence. Plasma storms danced around him. Magnetic waves threatened to tear his ship apart, and gravity shifted as if trying to push him away. Yet he pressed forward, each maneuver precise, each adjustment critical. He could see the outline of the royal cruiser, flickering through the haze, struggling against the forces that sought to crush it. The sight ignited a surge of determination within him. These were not just royalty. They were people in desperate need of help, relying entirely on his skill and courage to survive. In that moment, Captain Ryan Hale became more than a pilot. He became a lifeline, a symbol of hope in the midst of chaos. He knew the risks, knew that entering the Nebula could mean death, but he also knew that doing nothing was far worse. As he whispered to himself again, "Hold on, I'm coming," it was a promise that carried the weight of his skill, his bravery, and his humanity. And with that, he plunged deeper into the heart of the Nebula, where few had dared to go, determined to reach the royal cruiser and the twin princesses before it was too late. The journey ahead would test every ounce of his courage, every bit of his experience, and every shred of his humanity. But he was ready. For in the vast, deadly expanse of the Theros Nebula, one human's resolve could mean the difference between life and death. And Ryan Hale intended to make that difference. As Captain Ryan Hale crossed the boundary of the Theros Nebula, the world outside his cockpit seemed to vanish entirely. Stars, once steady and comforting, were swallowed by a swirling storm of red, violet, and black mist. Lightning, like rivers of fire, arced unpredictably across the thick clouds, illuminating the deadly beauty of the place. Ryan's ship, the Vigilant, shuddered violently as invisible forces pressed against its hull. Every instrument he relied on flickered or went dark. The navigation systems, usually precise to a fraction of a degree, now struggled to maintain any sense of direction. The Nebula was alive in its own terrifying way, twisting and moving as though it could sense intruders, and Ryan had to rely entirely on instinct. One wrong move could tear his ship apart or fling him into the endless void, never to be found. Inside the royal cruiser, Princess Lyra and Princess Celine were fighting their own battle. The ship groaned and twisted under the Nebula's chaotic forces. Air alarms blared, warning of failing oxygen levels and dangerous pressure drops. Smoke curled through the corridors as sparks flew from broken panels. Crew members moved frantically, trying to repair systems that were failing faster than human hands could fix them. Lyra, calm and focused despite the fear gnawing at her chest, coordinated repairs as best as she could. She shouted instructions to engineers, redirected power to life support systems, and tried repeatedly to stabilize the ship's trajectory. Every second counted. The Nebula was relentless, and the storm could crush them at any moment. Beside her, Celine moved among the panicked crew, offering quiet reassurance and encouragement. She handed oxygen tanks to those who had collapsed, held trembling hands, and reminded them that survival depended on staying calm and working together. Even in this chaos, the princesses did not give up. They had been trained to lead in crises, but nothing had prepared them for the sheer terror of being trapped in the heart of the Theros Nebula, facing forces beyond imagination. And yet they refused to surrender to fear. Their courage shone as brightly as the storm outside, a beacon of hope for the crew and for themselves. Meanwhile, Ryan struggled to guide his ship through the swirling chaos. Plasma storms ripped across the mist, striking unpredictably and sending electric arcs dancing over his cockpit. Gravity fields twisted and warped, threatening to pull the ship apart or hurl it into deep space. The nebula's gases clung to his hull, creating pressure waves that threw him from side to side. Instruments glitched, warning lights flashed endlessly, and the usual hum of the ship's systems was drowned in alarms and the violent roar of the storm. Ryan gritted his teeth, sweating despite the controlled temperature inside his cockpit. Every movement, every adjustment of the thrusters had to be perfect. A single miscalculation, a single hesitation, and he would become another lost soul swallowed by the Theros Nebula. Through the static and noise, Ryan finally made contact with the royal cruiser. His voice was rough, strained from the distance and interference, but it carried a confidence that immediately calmed the crew. "I see your beacon. I'm closing in," he said. Lyra and Celine exchanged looks of disbelief and relief. They had thought themselves alone in the storm, doomed to drift endlessly in the swirling chaos. But now hope had arrived, embodied in a lone human pilot willing to risk everything for them. It was impossible, yet there he was. Somehow Ryan Hale had found them, threading his ship through the deadly maze of plasma and magnetic storms. Ryan adjusted his course, using his instincts to anticipate the nebula's unpredictable behavior. He remembered every story he had ever heard about the Theros Nebula, the fleets that vanished, the ships torn apart by invisible forces, the pilots who never returned. None of that mattered now. His focus was entirely on reaching the royal cruiser, getting the princesses to safety and surviving long enough to bring them out. The odds were terrifyingly against him. He knew he might not survive, but he also knew that hesitation would be far more dangerous. The princesses, their crew, every life on that ship depended on him. Ryan's determination burned as brightly as the storm around him. Inside the royal cruiser, the twins and the crew prepared for the impossible. Lyra calculated the best location for Ryan to dock, considering the ship's damage and the nebula's constant pressure shifts. Celine directed the remaining crew to secure themselves and to assist anyone who might be injured. Every action was urgent, every decision crucial. They worked as a team, relying on their training, courage, and trust in the mysterious human pilot who had come to their aid. It was a moment of shared desperation, a fragile balance between hope and fear, and every heartbeat counted. Ryan's ship moved closer, navigating gaps between lightning bolts and avoiding swirling plasma clouds. His hands flew over the controls, making tiny adjustments in milliseconds to keep the ship stable. Sweat ran down his face and his muscles ached from the strain, but he did not allow fear to touch him. The nebula was testing him, pushing him to the edge, but Ryan was relentless. He could see the royal cruiser flickering in the red and violet mist, damaged but holding together. Every second he gained brought him closer to the princesses and their crew. Every successful maneuver was a victory. Every moment he stayed in control, a lifeline for those who had already lost hope. As the distance closed, the royal crew watched in awe as the small human ship appeared out of the swirling clouds. It was like a single star piercing a stormy night sky. Lyra's eyes filled with tears she did not try to hide. Celine's hands trembled, not from fear but from relief and gratitude. They could hardly believe that someone had dared to enter the nebula and reach them. Ryan's courage was extraordinary, but it was his skill, precision, and unwavering determination that brought him this far. In the midst of a place where death lurked at every turn, he had found a way. The nebula roared around them, almost as if it were alive, resisting his every effort. Magnetic surges pushed against his ship. Plasma lightning struck dangerously close, and the swirling gases threatened to destabilize both ships. Yet Ryan pressed on, his mind sharp, his instincts honed, his focus absolute. Every move he made was calculated, deliberate, and aimed at one goal: reach the royal cruiser and rescue those trapped inside. The princesses, watching through damaged windows and flickering lights, began to believe that survival was possible. Against all odds, hope had arrived, carried by a lone human willing to challenge the impossible. Even as the nebula's deadly forces battered his ship, Ryan's determination never wavered. The Vigilant shuddered, sparks flying inside the cockpit, alarmed, screaming, yet he remained steady, moving closer with each passing second. Every meter gained was a victory, every obstacle overcome a testament to his courage and skill. He could feel the nebula's wrath all around him, but he refused to let it intimidate him. His eyes locked on the beacon from the royal cruiser, and he whispered again to himself, "Hold on. I'm coming." It was a promise, a vow of determination that would carry him through the storm and into the heart of the cruiser. For the princesses and their crew, Ryan Hale was no longer just a pilot. They were clinging to a lifeline. Every action he took, every maneuver he made, brought them closer to salvation. Their trust in him grew with each passing moment, and in that swirling chaos amidst fire, smoke, and electricity, a fragile thread of hope connected them all. Against the deadliest forces of nature, human courage, skill, and determination shone brighter than any storm. Captain Ryan Hale's hands moved with precision, muscles tense as he guided the Vigilant closer to the damaged royal cruiser. The nebula of Theros roared around him, plasma lightning crackling through the thick clouds, waves of charged gas pressing on every inch of his ship. The magnetic surges made the Vigilant shudder violently, threatening to tear its hull apart. Yet Ryan remained focused, eyes locked on the distant lights of the cruiser, watching for a moment to make his move. Docking in these conditions was madness for anyone else, but he had no choice. Lives were at stake, and every second counted. The twin princesses, Lyra and Selene, were trapped on that ship, and he knew the crew's survival depended entirely on him. He took a deep breath, steadied his nerves, and carefully maneuvered the ship alongside the cruiser's damaged docking bay. Sparks flew from exposed panels and thick smoke filled parts of the corridors. But he ignored the danger. Each adjustment of the thrusters was deliberate, each calculation a balance between life and death. The nebula seemed to resist him at every turn. Gravity twists pulled the ship in unexpected directions, and plasma arcs struck dangerously close. One wrong move could send the Vigilant spinning into the void or crush it against the cruiser's broken hull. But Ryan had trained for extreme situations like this, and instinct guided him as much as his instruments. Inside the royal cruiser, panic and fear threatened to overwhelm the crew, but the princesses remained calm. Lyra's voice rang out, steady and commanding, directing the engineers to stabilize power and life support systems wherever possible. She moved quickly from station to station, her hands flying over consoles and controls, trying to buy time. Every system was failing. Every second brought new danger, yet her mind stayed clear, calculating the best way to survive. Beside her, Selene comforted those who had collapsed or panicked, handing out oxygen and reassuring frightened crew members. The princesses had always been trained to lead, but this was beyond any simulation or practice. They were facing a storm that could destroy them instantly, and yet they refused to give in to fear. When Ryan's voice finally broke through the static, telling them he was closing in, the crew and the princesses could hardly believe it. He had come through the impossible, threading his way through the deadly nebula to reach them. Relief swept through the corridors like a warm wind. Lyra pressed herself against the console, feeling tears of gratitude prick her eyes. Selene clasped the hand of a trembling crew member, whispering, "We're not alone. Help is here." The sense of hope that Ryan brought with him was almost tangible. It was a reminder that even in the most desperate situations, courage and determination could make the impossible possible. Ryan aligned the Vigilant carefully with the cruiser's docking hatch. Sparks flew from broken panels and thick smoke billowed around the entry point, but he pressed on. The Vigilant shuddered under the nebula's violent forces, metal groaning in protest, but he refused to retreat. The docking sequence required perfect timing. Too fast and the fragile hulls could collide, causing catastrophic damage. Too slow, and the storm would tear them apart before any connection could be made. Ryan's instincts guided him. Every twitch of the controls measured, every maneuver precise. Outside, the nebula twisted and pulsed as if alive, testing him at every step, but he didn't falter. Inside the cruiser, the princesses prepared for the boarding. Lyra gathered the crew who could help, instructing them to secure oxygen tanks and ready emergency harnesses. Selene ensured that the weaker or injured members were stabilized, moving quickly through the smoke-filled corridors to calm panicked hearts. They had no time to waste. The nebula was relentless, and every moment brought new dangers. The sound of groaning metal and alarms blaring filled the air. Yet despite the chaos, there was a sense of determination among the crew. They had a chance, however slim, and they were willing to fight for it. The moment came. Ryan secured the Vigilant and opened the docking hatch. He wore a cracked oxygen mask and a suit patched hastily from previous missions. Smoke swirled around him as he floated into the corridor, assessing the situation. The first thing he did was take in the crew and the princesses. Everyone looked exhausted, terrified, and on the edge of despair. Ryan's presence brought a strange calm. He didn't introduce himself or explain. He simply started moving. He tied safety lines and directed the crew to follow him, making a path through the damaged ship. Every step was dangerous. Exposed wiring sparked, Oxygen levels dropped, and the structure of the ship shifted with every surge from the nebula. The princesses followed closely. Lyra moved quickly, her training and courage guiding her. Celine kept an eye on the crew, helping those who faltered or panicked. They trusted Ryan completely, despite having only just met him. There was no time for hesitation. The only way out was to follow him, and they did so with quiet determination. Ryan handed oxygen tanks to those who needed them most, even giving one to a small child who had collapsed. He ignored the pain in his chest, the fatigue building in his muscles, focusing solely on getting everyone to safety. As they made their way through the corridors, a massive surge from the nebula hit. The ship lurched violently, throwing Ryan and others to the floor. Panels cracked, wires flew, and alarms screamed. Lyra's voice rang out, directing everyone to hold fast and stay together. Celine supported the injured, ensuring they were ready to continue. Ryan pushed himself up, checking every crew member before moving forward. The docking and emergency paths were treacherous, with sections of the hull missing or collapsing. Ryan tied himself with safety cables and extended lines across gaps, creating makeshift bridges for the crew to cross. Each step was calculated. One misstep could send someone into the void. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the final airlock leading to the Vigilant. Ryan went first, securing the hatch and ensuring the crew could follow. One by one, the princesses and remaining crew crossed the gaps, their trust in Ryan absolute. He moved with them, steadying anyone who faltered, making sure no one was left behind. The nebula still raged outside, yet inside this fragile corridor, courage and teamwork shone brighter than any storm. Once everyone was safely aboard the Vigilant, Ryan took a moment to catch his breath. Sweat dripped down his face and his muscles ached, but he allowed himself only a brief pause. The nebula still threatened, and their journey was far from over. Yet in that moment, the bond formed between him and the royal sisters was undeniable. They had witnessed his courage, his skill, and his willingness to risk everything for their lives. And Ryan had seen their determination, their bravery, and the unyielding strength that defined them even in the face of certain death. The Vigilant disengaged from the cruiser, leaving behind the damaged ship and the chaos of the nebula. Sparks flew, panels twisted, and the red mist swirled around them, but Ryan guided them with careful precision, every decision critical. Lyra and Celine watched from the safety of the ship, their eyes reflecting a mixture of awe, gratitude, and respect. He had risked everything to save them, and against all odds, he had succeeded. In the heart of the Theros Nebula, surrounded by death and destruction, Captain Ryan Hale had proven that courage, determination, and skill could defy even the most impossible circumstances. The rescue was not over yet. They still had to navigate out of the nebula alive, but for the first time, hope filled the hearts of the twin princesses and their crew. Against the storm that had claimed countless lives before, a single human pilot had made the impossible possible. After the daring rescue inside the nebula, Captain Ryan Hale guided the Vigilant away from the damaged royal cruiser. The storm was still raging, but each passing second brought them closer to safety. Ryan's hands moved over the controls with steady precision, every movement calculated to avoid the swirling plasma, the magnetic surges, and the violent gravitational waves of the Theros Nebula. He was exhausted, his muscles sore from the strain of maneuvering in near-impossible conditions, but he refused to slow down. He knew the crew and the twin princesses depended entirely on him. Each breath, each heartbeat was measured and focused on one goal: bring everyone out alive. Inside the ship, Princess Lyra and Princess Celine were quiet, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. They had faced death together, watched their crew nearly collapse under the pressure of the nebula, and now they were alive because of one human pilot. Lyra's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of the situation. She had been trained for diplomacy, politics, and leadership, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw courage and determination displayed by Ryan. Celine, younger but equally brave, sat with trembling hands, staring at the control panels and then at Ryan, a mixture of awe and gratitude in her eyes. The crew around them began to relax, though warily, realizing that they had survived the impossible. When the Vigilant finally exited the densest region of the nebula, the stars returned, sparkling in the distance like familiar friends. The red and violet mist thinned, and the violent storms were replaced by calm, open space. Ryan allowed himself a moment to breathe deeply, though he kept his eyes on the sensors. The nebula could be unpredictable and any relaxation could be dangerous. Still, a quiet sense of relief settled over the group. They had survived the heart of Theros, and it was Ryan's skill, courage, and unwavering determination that had brought them through. The princesses approached him carefully, aware that he was exhausted and injured from the rescue. Lyra's hand trembled slightly as she placed her fingers on his shoulder. "Captain Hale," she began softly, her voice filled with emotion. "You risked everything to save us. Words cannot express what we feel." Ryan, breathing heavily, looked at her and shrugged slightly, his humility plain. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly, but the intensity of his gaze showed that he understood the gravity of what had occurred. Celine stepped forward, clasping his hand gently. "No, this was more than a job," she said. "You saved our lives. You saved hope itself." The royal sisters told Ryan about an ancient Arendorian tradition that had been passed down through generations. If anyone outside their race ever saved the life of a royal, the crown would owe that person a life debt, an honor to be fulfilled for all time. The story, old as the stars themselves, seemed almost unbelievable in the modern age, but the sincerity in their eyes left Ryan speechless. Lyra placed her royal insignia, a small, gleaming medallion, into his hand, a tangible symbol of their gratitude and the promise that humanity and Arendor would now be bound by honor. Ryan turned it over in his hand, marveling at the weight and significance of the gesture. Even as the nebula faded behind them, the emotional weight of the rescue settled over everyone. The crew began repairing minor damages in the Vigilant, checking oxygen levels and securing the ship for the remainder of the journey. Ryan allowed himself a brief rest, leaning back in his seat, muscles sore and mind racing. He replayed the events over and over, the plasma arcs, the shifting gravity, the terrified faces of the crew, and the bravery of the princesses. Each memory reinforced his belief that courage, determination, and skill could overcome even the deadliest challenges. For Lyra and Celine, the experience was life-changing. They had faced death in a nebula that had claimed entire fleets and emerged alive, thanks to Ryan. The bond formed during those hours of chaos was profound. They had seen his humanity, his selflessness, and his unwavering focus. More than that, they had felt the raw courage that only a person willing to risk everything for others could display. Their trust in him was absolute, and the life debt promised by their ancient oath was no mere formality. It was an acknowledgement of something that transcended politics or duty. During the return journey, the princesses began to speak quietly with Ryan, asking questions about his life, his training, and his experiences. They wanted to understand the man who had become their savior, the human who had risked everything in a storm that had destroyed countless ships before. Ryan answered patiently, recounting past missions, challenges he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. He spoke not with pride, but with humility, showing that his courage was born not from ego, but from a deep sense of responsibility and empathy. The twins listened intently, fascinated and inspired, realizing that heroism was often quiet, unseen, and personal. By the time the Vigilant approached a safe starport in Arendor territory, word of the rescue had already spread. Every system that communicated with the region knew that a human pilot had braved the nebula of Theros to save the royal family. Ryan's actions had not gone unnoticed, and he was hailed as a hero not just by the twins but by countless people who recognized the bravery and sacrifice involved. Yet Ryan remained modest, insisting that he had only done what anyone else in his position would have done. He deflected praise, focusing instead on the survival and safety of the princesses and their crew. When they finally landed, the medics attended to Ryan immediately, checking for injuries sustained during the mission. Bruises, minor burns, and extreme fatigue were all present, but he waved off most concerns, insisting that he was fine. The twins accompanied him to the med bay, their expressions serious and sincere. Lyra placed her hands on Ryan's shoulders again. "You have given us our lives," she said softly. "Arendor will never forget this. Humanity will never be forgotten either." Celine nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We owe you more than words, Captain. You have honored every code of bravery and loyalty known to our people." The life debt, an ancient concept, was formalized in a quiet ceremony. The royal sisters presented Ryan with a medallion, a token of honor that symbolized the promise that Arendor would always protect and support him and humanity in return. For Ryan, it was not about the symbol itself, but about the recognition of courage, empathy, and the connection formed through shared peril. The nebula had tested every limit of skill and human endurance, yet it had also created a bond that transcended race, politics, and tradition. In the days that followed, Ryan reflected on the mission. The Theros Nebula had been deadly, unpredictable, and merciless, yet it had also revealed something extraordinary about human potential and the power of courage. He had faced almost certain death and survived, but more importantly, he had saved lives and forged connections that would last a lifetime. Lyra and Selene remained in contact with him, not only as rulers and heirs to a throne, but as friends who had shared a bond forged in fire and danger. The twins' gratitude went beyond formal life debts. It was genuine, heartfelt, and enduring. Ryan realized that his actions had changed more than just the immediate situation. The nebula had almost killed him, yet it had created trust between two races, honor between distant worlds, and a reminder that bravery, empathy, and selflessness could bridge even the most impossible gaps. The princesses, through their words, their gestures, and the ancient promise they honored, had ensured that the story of this rescue would echo across the stars, remembered not just for the peril faced, but for the courage and humanity displayed in the face of it. By the time he finally left the medbay and returned to his ship, Ryan understood the weight of what had happened. He had not only saved the twin princesses and their crew, but had also become part of a story larger than any one individual. The nebula of Theros, once only feared, would now be remembered as the backdrop for a heroic tale of determination, courage, and honor. In the calm that followed the storm, Ryan knew that his life, like the lives of Lyra and Selene, had been forever changed by the events of those intense hours. The twin princesses had honored their promise, and in doing so, had acknowledged the extraordinary power of a single human's bravery in the face of impossible odds. Months had passed since Captain Ryan Hale had braved the deadly Theros Nebula to rescue the twin princesses of Arendor. Life for him had mostly returned to its usual routine missions, training exercises, and quiet moments in his quarters. Yet the events of that mission had left an indelible mark on him, both physically and emotionally. His muscles still ached from the strain of navigating the violent storms, and faint scars reminded him daily of the near-death experience. But even more significant than the physical evidence was the bond that had formed between him and the royal twins. That bond, forged in fire and chaos, was now beginning to show its lasting consequences. The first sign came quietly, through interstellar communications. A small Arendorian delegation appeared in Earth's orbit. Ryan had expected nothing more than formal gratitude, perhaps a ceremonial acknowledgement for the heroic act. But what arrived was far more substantial. Lyra and Selene themselves were present, commanding a fleet of ships that gleamed like twin stars against the blackness of space. Their arrival immediately drew attention from Earth's space authorities and the human fleet, who recognized the significance of the event. The princesses were not there simply to deliver thanks. They were there to fulfill a promise, a life debt that had been owed since the day Ryan had risked everything for them. As the Arendorian fleet approached, Ryan prepared to meet them. His ship, the Vigilant, was ready, though he could not hide the anticipation and nervousness he felt. He had never expected anything beyond gratitude for his actions, yet he understood the importance of this moment. The life debt promised by the ancient oath was no small gesture. It carried weight not just with the royal family, but with the entire civilization of Arendor. As Ryan watched the lead ship descend into orbit, he felt a mixture of humility, awe, and curiosity. When the princesses arrived aboard the spaceport station, the ceremony began. Lyra and Selene stepped forward, regal and poised, yet their eyes shone with genuine warmth and gratitude. They did not speak in formalities alone. Their words carried the depth of experience, danger, and shared humanity from the rescue months before. "Captain Hale," Lyra said, her voice steady but emotional. "You risked your life to save ours and our people. Today we honor the promise our family has carried for generations. Today humanity receives the bond of our gratitude, support, and alliance." Selene added, "This is more than a formal debt. It is a recognition that courage, empathy, and selflessness transcend the boundaries of worlds. You, Captain, have reminded us of the strength in humanity, and for that we honor you and your people." The declaration stunned the audience. People had expected a ceremony of thanks, but what unfolded was far more than words. It was the beginning of a long-lasting alliance. The princesses announced that, in fulfillment of the life debt, Arendor would provide aid, technology, and support to humanity in times of need. Supplies for trade, advanced medical equipment, and technological knowledge would be shared freely, creating a bond between the two civilizations. The gesture went beyond diplomacy. It was personal. The princess's promise to Ryan reflected a recognition of the profound courage he had displayed, and of the deep human connection that had formed under the worst circumstances imaginable. Ryan, ever humble, struggled to respond. He was unaccustomed to such praise and attention. I just did what anyone would have, he said quietly, shaking his head. Yet even as he spoke, he realized that this moment was not about personal heroism. It was about what one person's courage could inspire in the lives of many. The crew he had saved, the royal family, and now the human race as a whole, were all beneficiaries of a single act of bravery in the heart of a deadly storm. It was a humbling realization, one that filled him with both pride and responsibility. The twin princesses insisted on meeting the crew who had been aboard the damaged cruiser. Every surviving member of the mission was honored alongside Ryan, highlighting the teamwork and courage it had taken to survive the Nebula. They shared their experiences, told their stories, and acknowledged the bravery of each individual. Ryan watched as the crew received recognition, their faces glowing with pride and relief. It was a reminder that heroism was rarely solitary. While his actions had been extraordinary, they had been supported by the dedication, trust, and courage of the princesses and the crew alike. Over the course of the ceremony, Ryan and the princesses spoke privately. Lyra expressed how deeply the rescue had affected her. "I will never forget the moment you stepped into the corridor," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "We had no hope left. Your courage was the only thing keeping us alive." Celine added, "You reminded us that even in the darkest storm, there is light if someone dares to reach for it. That light has changed our world, Captain, and now it will help change ours forever." The words were not just gratitude. They were acknowledgement of the profound impact Ryan's actions had on the lives of two people, a crew and an entire civilization. As the event concluded, the twin suns of Arendor rose over the horizon of the station, casting light over the assembled fleet and the human guests. Ryan looked out at the scene, taking in the sight of ships, people, and technology now connected across worlds because of one extraordinary rescue. The Nebula, once a symbol of fear and death, had become the stage for a story of courage, determination, and connection. The promise fulfilled by the princesses was tangible, but it also carried symbolic weight, proof that acts of bravery can ripple across time and space, forging bonds that survive generations. The aftermath of the mission was far-reaching. Humanity benefited from Arendor's aid, gaining access to medical innovations, technological knowledge, and supplies that would have been impossible to obtain alone. Trade routes between Earth and Arendor opened, creating opportunities for learning and cultural exchange. Diplomatic ties grew stronger, but the foundation of this alliance remained personal. The bond between Captain Ryan Hale and the twin princesses, forged in the heart of a deadly storm. For Ryan, the alliance was remarkable, but the connection with the sisters, the trust, respect, and understanding formed under extreme circumstances, was the most meaningful outcome of all. In the quiet moments after the ceremony, Ryan reflected on how far they had all come. The Nebula had tested every limit of skill, courage, and human endurance. Lives had been at stake, and yet one person's determination had changed the course of events in ways no one could have anticipated. The princesses' fulfillment of their ancient promise was a testament to the importance of honor, empathy, and gratitude across civilizations. What had begun as a life-or-death struggle had evolved into something greater, a bridge between worlds built on courage, trust, and the simple but powerful act of risking one's life for another. Ryan's name became known across star systems. Songs, stories, and accounts of his bravery spread, but he remained humble. To him, the true reward was seeing the princesses and their crew safe, and knowing that the future of human Arendorian relations had been forever changed for the better. He had faced the deadliest storm, risked his life in the unknown, and emerged not just as a hero, but as a symbol of what courage, empathy, and determination could accomplish. As the twin suns of Arendor rose fully, casting their warm light over the fleet, Ryan understood the full meaning of the mission. He had not only saved lives, but he had also built trust between worlds, created hope where there had been despair, and fulfilled a promise that spanned generations. The Nebula would forever remain a memory of danger and chaos, but also a memory of extraordinary courage and human connection. And as he looked at Lyra and Celine, standing proudly among their people, he knew that the act of risking one's life for others could indeed change the fate of civilizations. The story of Captain Ryan Hale's heroism, the twin princesses' gratitude, and the life debt fulfilled became a legend, a reminder that courage, determination, and empathy can bridge even the vastest distances in space. It was proof that one person's bravery could create lasting change, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations to come. The Nebula had tested humanity, but in the end, it also revealed its potential to rise above fear and darkness, forging bonds and fulfilling promises that would echo across the stars forever.